Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from July 10th to the 16th. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Think of it like a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the US industry, identify top US MSOs that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now, and take advantage whenever you feel ready, of course pending whatever incremental reform we get that we've been waiting on. But some great news out of Missouri as Missouri cannabis market continues strong growth trends, which we love to see, as in June 2023 they reached a combined sales of $121.3 million, which marks the 5th consecutive month in which dispensaries in the state surpassed the 100 million milestone in combined sales. And since the first legal sale in October 2020, and so it was medical only from October 2020 to February 2023, but since for medical, Missouri has achieved cumulative sales of more than 1.23 billion, yet roughly 1/3, 444 million of that total is coming from adult use sales starting just 5 months ago in February of 2023. And so there's a bit more here. You can pause to read and look at this little figure. Of course, when you launch and legalize for adult use, we see sales jump up like that as more people get access to a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative. But just for the breakdown, in June, rec sales reached a record of 95 million, while medical sales fell to 26 million, the lowest single month total for medicinal cannabis sales since November 2021. And there's more down here if you want to pause to read. Otherwise, grab the full link if you're interested. With that, from New Cannabis Ventures, as Michigan cannabis sales set a monthly record in June. Sales rose in June 6% from the longer May to a record 260.8 million. And so you can pause to read a little bit more about that or look at the visual here. But main thing to point out is Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency breaks out sales by medical and adult use, with medical sales falling 61.9% from a year ago to just 6.6 million, down 5.8% sequentially. But again, if you can just get what you need at the recreational dispensary, it's less hoops to jump through. And adult use sales expanding 53.2% year over year to 254.2 million, up 6.4% sequentially. And so obviously adult use is dominating there. We can pause to read for a bit more of the breakdown. While lastly, one of the benefits Michigan has seen by being an unlimited licensed state is obviously providing equal access to as many that want to join in on the opportunity, but because of that, prices have fallen dramatically, which from my point of view is better for the consumer in the end. Obviously, if we can see prices fall but volume increase like we're seeing in Michigan, this is the best case scenario. So a lot of good things happening in Michigan that many other states can learn from. Of course, Missouri too. Just wanted to point that out though, as Michigan cannabis sales expanded 82.1% in 2021 to 1.79 billion and were up 27.9% in 2022 at 2.29 billion, but so far in 2023 sales have grown 38.5% compared to the first 6 months of 2022. And so the growth continues in volume as prices fall, and again, that's better than Prohibition, obviously. And so from MJ Biz Daily, Illinois awards 55 more adult use cannabis licenses. They're looking more and more like New York, as it's taking a long time for them to get these extra social equity dispensaries up and running, but not always up to them. It can be up to the person that applies and has to go through the hoops in order to get it started. All that to say, Illinois regulators awarded an additional 55 licenses in a lottery aiming to create a more equitable industry and expand access to regulated cannabis, as nearly 2,700 applicants were hoping to snag one of the conditional retail licenses, which were reserved for entrepreneurs who meet the state's social equity criteria, according to the Country Herald of Bourbonnais. But get this, of the 192 social equity licenses that were previously awarded, only 27 stores have opened. And again, you can't blame that all on the state. Of course, it's those license winners that also have to meet the certain requirements in order to get the stores open, and so clearly many of them have not done that for whatever reason. But all this to say, 27 stores added is better than no stores added, and hopefully we've got, about another 160 something to go. But sadly, it's not really surprising because, of course, without the Safe Banking Act, it will likely be challenging for many of these awardees to raise the necessary funds to open their stores without getting predatory loan rates to begin with. And so with that, from MJ Biz Daily, New Mexico yanks cannabis retailers license for selling California product. Fuck around and find out. And so they revoked an Albuquerque adult use cannabis retailer license for unlawfully selling products produced in California, and so Paradise Exotics Distro is the culprit. And so more here if you want to pause to read just to learn about this. Besides them, obviously everyone else in Albuquerque, or I should say New Mexico, is benefiting as the state recorded more than $300 million in sales in the first year, and they're loving the fact that they ended cannabis prohibition. But of course, if you break the laws regardless, at least we're seeing some consequences, and those held accountable in New Mexico as opposed to New York. But with that, as the never-ending political theater continues to take priority over Congress working for the will of the American people. And if you've stuck with us this far, you must have developed a very strong stomach, which I promise will be very important for the rest of your investing career. But I think Jesse Redmond encapsulates the last few days of this week quite well with this image, as it never ends. We have enough Republican votes to get it passed, but Democrats keep moving the goalposts, the spokesperson said, and worst of it, it's up to the Democrats to hold the vote on the floor. And of course, we know the votes are there to pass it. And so what is the holdup? Who's essentially to blame after all this time? And so for Marijuana Moment, Senate GOP cannabis banking sponsor and key chairman at odds over next steps for safe banking bill. And so this was as of July 12th. It's kind of old news now, but you can pause to read the top bit, as in an interview this week, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Sherrod Brown and lead GOP Safe Banking Act sponsor Steve Daines shared conflicting stories about the state of negotiations over the legislation. And so conflicting stories, is it good reporting for Marijuana Moment, or are we just seeing more and more political theater, which it turns out to probably be, as Brown told Politico that he's entrusting Daines to shore up more Republican support, specifically get additional members of his caucus to sign on the Safe Banking Act as co-sponsors to codify that support. We're not going to take a bill to the floor and have Mitch undercut it with 58 or 59 votes, Brown said. He's done that many times, so we want Daines to sign on the dotted line on this and really commit that he's going to get members to co-sponsor. And if they're serious, they'll co-sponsor. And this leads you to believe that, oh no, they're going to have the ability to filibuster, but according to Don Murphy, we know that's not the case, and we know the Republican votes are there. But according to Daines, the issue isn't a lack of Republican support, it's the fact that the Democratic members are pushing for amendments that would break the agreement that he and the chairman made over the measures introduced. What do you know? And again, who keeps moving the goalposts? Sadly, Daines told Punchbowl News that Republicans are ready to move forward on that bill, but Democrats are trying to change it. He added that he didn't see positive yardage in bipartisan negotiations over the recent 4th of July recess. Not what we wanted to hear, but senior GOP Senate aide, meanwhile, told Marijuana Moment on Wednesday that the remaining issue came down to Section 10 of the Safe Banking Act. And I'm sure you've heard a lot more about this over the last few days. Dems, like Senator Jack Reed, have called the language problematic, arguing it would broadly undermine banking regulations outside of the cannabis sector. And this is whatever figment of his imagination he's made up and how it can be applied in other ways. Fair enough, but he's the guy standing in the way. As Reed's Section 10 concerns are the main issue holding up the bill, the staffer said, adding that gutting the section is a non-starter for Republicans. And so almost back to square one, but I wouldn't say just that. And so there's more here if you wanted to pause to read. Otherwise, grab the full link in the description. But so a bit of a breakdown of what the whole Section 10 means and what Jack Reed feels that it can, how it can be misinterpreted. I just invite you to pause to read from the Dales report as they summarize it here, referencing the same article that we just mentioned. And so this is about Section 10, but I wanted to bring you to this story that we got yesterday as of July 14th, which is essentially the best up-to-date story we got on this from Cannabis Business Times, highlighting safe banking backed by at least 9 GOP senators. Bill lies largely in Democrats' court. And so I appreciate Cannabis Business Times for not trying to pin both sides against each other and telling us like it is. We have the votes with the GOP. It's ultimately up to the Dems to hold the vote on the floor to actually pass the bill. As the Republican support indicates, legislation to provide traditional banking services to the cannabis industry has the votes to avoid a filibuster. So, Dems, what is the holdup in the Senate? Right? As the GOP threshold for support comes with Senator Susan Collins, a Republican out of Maine, and so thank you, Susan Collins, for supporting a bill that will in fact make America safer, adding her name as a co-sponsor on July 13th, while she also co-sponsored the Safe Banking Act in 2021. And while just wanted to add, there's more down here about Section 10 and Jack Reed if you wanted to pause to read. Might be a little bit more objective and up-to-date from what we saw in Marijuana Moment. But with that, more down here if you wanted to read, again, Jack Reed in Section 10, this part highlighted in blue. But from that, on that note, Reed said that the committee has more work to do before giving the nod to the legislation. So is it just more political theater and stalling? And that stance is where the hiccup in a potential committee vote, not necessarily a Senate vote, but a vote within the banking committee, has caused a stall this week, which could delay movement on the legislation ahead of the August recess for Congress. Obviously, we don't like to hear this, but if it's a little delay, ultimately doesn't mean that it's not happening. Now, a bit more here. Should the 23-member banking committee, which includes Safe Banking Act sponsor Steve Daines, overcome that snag and send the legislation to the Senate floor for a vote, the chances for a potential filibuster are now severely limited. That's the positive news for industry advocates this week, with Collins signing on as a co-sponsor for the legislation. So with Collins' support, 8 Republicans in the upper chamber now have their names signed onto the bill, while obviously the one holdout who at least, I think, confirmed support by name with Cannabis Business Times has yet to put his name is Senator Tommy Tuberville. But these are the GOP supporters, so for what it's worth, wanted to share this up-to-date version from Cannabis Business Times. And then, folks, lastly, wanted to bring you up to a list of potential safe co-sponsors that we can reach out to starting next week. And while I say we, I'm a Canadian, so it doesn't necessarily apply to me, but if you're in the States, folks, and you can reach out to some of these remaining co-sponsors, and main reason I highlighted these top 3 is that Mike Lee represents a state where medical is legal and would obviously see the benefits of getting the cash off the streets and into the banking system to stop the discrimination and hopefully reduce potential dispensary robberies. But at the same time, these 2 Missouri senators, Josh Hawley and Eric Schmidt, I featured a letter sent back from Schmidt to another cannabis advocate in my last video, pointing out that he would support the Safe Banking Act. Only thing is, he hasn't signed on his name as a co-sponsor. And so if, again, folks, you can help, please consider doing so. And these 3 names might be the biggest ones that we can reach out to starting next week, as ultimately the more names that represent medical and recreational legal states that we can convince to put their names on the bill now, the sooner we'll likely see a vote, as per Sherrod Brown's words saying, well, we don't want 58 or 59 votes. We know that's not the case, especially from that last article. This bill is already filibuster proof, and so the more we can get, we essentially just try to force Sherrod's hand. And so list of Dems here, list of Republicans here, and if you've been reaching out to your senators or state reps, I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And if you know a way that I can get access to a free US phone number and make these calls as well, please let me know in the comments, because I'd love to help out if possible. But with that, from MJ Biz Daily, I think this is the biggest story of the week, underratedly, as of July 13th, as states give cannabis data to Biden administration for rescheduling review. And while safe banking is the talk of the town at the moment, remember, you cannot provide equal access to opportunity to all the people you promised an opportunity to if they can't bank. It's just simple common sense why Safe Auto was passed 2.5 years ago. But the bigger catalyst from this, just remember, is that if we get cannabis rescheduled to 3 or lower, which is more likely than complete descheduling, which is better for everybody, giving the plant back to us, which we all want, 280E goes away overnight, and many of these MSOs will be profitable or cash flow positive once 280E is removed, and they can keep some of their profits. So just keep that in mind. This is a much bigger catalyst, and while we don't know much, just an update, as at least 5 states with medical cannabis programs have shared key data, including the products patients are using and how they are affected, with U.S. health regulators as part of the Biden administration's review of whether to remove cannabis from the federal government's list of the most dangerous drugs. Alcohol is not even included. MJ Biz Daily has learned. The state data sent to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services offers federal researchers a wider and deeper look into cannabis use and its medical potential than most peer-reviewed studies available to researchers, experts told MJ Biz Daily. And so what's interesting is that we can actually look through that. So I invite you to do that. Main thing to highlight is that so far Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Utah have shared information with federal health regulators about cannabis use gleaned from their state programs, officials from those markets confirmed. As Biden ordered the review last fall, but as to be expected, the Dems are going to take their sweet-ass time and wait to the last minute until they have to report anything. Go figure. And so you can pause to read this last bit here. Otherwise, I'll scroll down and bring you to other parts. Mind you, it's a long article, so you can grab the full link in the description. So you can pause to read that bit. Well, they actually provided all the information in here, a good amount, and so I have not gone through this yet, but I do plan to do so, and I do hope it's presented in the most objective way possible, as opposed to trying to find specific outcomes. But it's a good start down here. As first, legalization has reduced the harms caused by involvement with the criminal justice system. Of course, if it's no longer illegal, less reason and resources for the police to go after and target people that, you know, maybe they shouldn't be doing so. And so survey says, in general, we've had very few adverse events reported, Rock said. That's a nice takeaway. But the FDA has yet to respond to states with shared information, of course, because they never do their job when it has to be related to cannabis. In an ongoing paradox down to the scope, duration, and significance of abuse, you can pause to read. Well, then you can pause to read from what, if any, risk are there to public health? No more than the current status quo. Down to states and territories, you can pause to read. And then from nobody can really say, in announcing his administration's yada, 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 down to, well, what cannabis are we talking about, he added. The damn medicine. It is what it is. Get over it. And preferably, please deschedule. And so that's essentially the whole article there. While it may be a different year, we get the same shit out of the NDAA as Tom Engel shares, yikes, congressional Republican leadership and the House Rules Committee blocked all proposed cannabis and psychedelic amendments to the NDAA from receiving floor votes. And while this was to be expected because every year they'll say this has nothing to do with national defense, Tom obviously likes to harp that it's the Republicans when at the same time it's the Dems holding up safe. And so, Tom, at what point are you going to realize that both of them work for the same oligarchs and we have to come together and unite and actually do all this shit ourselves? I think we're obviously picking up on that now. But all this to say, it does suck. I was hopeful that it would happen because they made the amendments made it in. Clearly, they got taken out, and all this means is that the military has to continue testing for cannabis, which is a huge waste of resources, and it's going to force them to find lower quality candidates for the military, and then sadly, veterans who need access to cannabis most cannot get the recommendations from VA doctors that would have been allowed had these amendments been passed. And so, obviously, it's a damn crime. Full article in the description if you wanted to go through that, but not surprising as that sort of shenanigans continues, as does this one, so thank you, Todd, for sharing. But the House and Senate moved to keep blocking the DC cannabis sales, but protecting state medical cannabis laws. When the residents of DC voted for legal cannabis in 2014, it's now going on 9 years later when they're like, nah, we're not going to legalize it. We're just going to make everyone in DC qualify as a medical patient, and that's how we work around not having to do our job, right? Patients and doctors in states with approved medical cannabis need to know they are safe from arrest and prosecution by the federal government. And again, another clever workaround as opposed to doing their job. Full link in the description. And ironic as more and more studies come out, this one from Normal but funny. Study, cannabis use enhances runner's high during exercise. Counterintuitive, but if anyone's ever jogged, and anyone who consumes cannabis, you know that sometimes you can get in the groove and you can just run forever, like Forrest Gump. The use of cannabis prior to running is associated with greater feelings of enjoyment and tranquility, according to data published in the journal Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research. Fascinating, right? Study participants ran an average of 3.88 miles, and participants reported a more positive exercise experience when they ran immediately after having used cannabis as compared to when they did not. While I typically don't smoke before I exercise, I usually save my consumption until after jiu-jitsu. Sometimes though, you just take a puff and then you get a burst of energy, you go for that run, you have a great workout, and then you're just grateful. And so fascinating findings here. Of course, you can pause to read the rest of what the study found. Well, I got this one from Kerger, Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoids from December 20th, 2023, which has to be from the future because we're not in December yet. Tolerability and efficacy of a 10:25 preparation of 9-tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol for treatment of chronic back and or neck pain, a multiple dose escalation study. And so just going to bring you to the abstract. Main thing, it's a small study, only 28 patients were enrolled, but it was well tolerated with the majority of adverse events of mild severity. The most common adverse events were nausea, vomiting, fatigue, dizziness, headache, paresthesia, and anxiety, much better than suicidal ideation that you get from other prescription medications. But there were dose-dependent improvements in numerical pain rating scores with clinically significant reductions in pain at yada, yada, yada. Conclusion, in patients with chronic neck and back pain, CBD and delta-9 THC were well tolerated, and doses of the amount here showed clinically significant reduction in pain compared to baseline pain scores. How is that not a medicine? Time to deschedule the damn thing, right? And with this one from Green Market Report highlighting one thing that we do have, or at least one benefit on our side as time moves forward, Gen Z fuels rise in cannabis over alcohol. Can cannabis replace Cabernet? Probably not completely, but a lot of interesting data here to point out is since 2021, there's been a notable shift in alcohol consumption trends, with Brightfield Group's research indicating that 60% of alcohol consumers are drinking less as of the first quarter of 2023, a 3% rise from when tracking began. And so there's quite a bit more here if you wanted to pause to read, but another one, according to Brightfield's data, 18% of alcohol users now prefer to use cannabis in social settings, with this preference more pronounced among millennials at 29%, and obviously I would include myself in that category. And so preferred cannabis to alcohol percentage of alcohol consumers preferring cannabis to alcohol in a social setting, almost 30% of millennials, nearly 35% of trendy enthusiast alcohol users, and just under 20% of all alcohol users. And so nonetheless, heading in a direction towards cannabis, or at least being more cannabis friendly. Kinda curious if you want to say that. Well, more information down here if you wanted to pause to read. Well, on to some MSO news, as Trulieve Cannabis Corp. to hold their second quarter 2023 results conference call on August 9th, 2023. Now, is it just me, or are the MSOs stacking their earnings calls on top of each other in anticipation of potentially better than expected earnings because of new markets coming online? I don't know, just thinking out loud, but from my understanding and from what I remember off the dome, I could be wrong, but Verano is supposed to have their earnings the morning of August 8th, while Green Thumb is the afternoon of August 8th, and then Trulieve is the morning of August 9th, while Cureleaf is set to be the afternoon of August 9th. And so let me know what you think that could mean in the comments. But with that, onto Air Wellness, as they announce agreement to acquire third Ohio dispensary license. Now, the terms of the agreement were not disclosed, likely because they announced that it has entered into an option agreement that provides Air with the future ability to acquire 100% of the equity interests of Twice the Wellness, an entity provisionally licensed to operate a medical cannabis dispensary in Ohio. So could this be some foreshadowing as Ohio is working towards launching and legalizing adult use first and then launching a market? Possibly. But apparently the company previously entered into option agreements to acquire Daily Relief, located in Riverside, and Heaven Wellness, located in Claremont County, while the company anticipates all three dispensaries to open by year end. And so I imagine the progress on how Ohio plans to legalize will dictate whether they exercise these options and acquire the 3 of them by the end of the year. But with that, from Green Market Report, a bit of a summary on Air Wellness and Trulieve as they expand into Ohio, despite apparently cannabis oversupply in that state. And so still operators are keeping their nose to the grindstone. And while I invite you to pause to read this top bit, I found this to be the most interesting of the article. The expansion momentum contrasts sharply with the realities of Ohio's cannabis market, which currently faces evident oversupply, hence maybe the push for adult use as well, because if there's an oversupply for medical, let's finally take that step, and obviously it's for the better. According to data from the Ohio Department of Commerce, the amount of cannabis flower ready for sale and bulk flower held by suppliers has approximately doubled in the year between June 2020 and June 2023. It can't get worse than Canada's situation, but the glut is affecting all product categories, and again, this is likely a push to want to create the adult use market as well that's going to sell all this excess cannabis. And so a bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read, bring you down to the rest of the article essentially. Otherwise, full link in the description if you wanted to go through that. But ultimately, from Jason Wild out of another MSO, TerrAscend, one of the benefits of uplisting to the TSX apparently, easier access for investors and less gatekeeping from these big banks. As he says, thank you, Morgan Stanley. Apparently, the following securities have been identified as permissible pursuant to the firm's MRB policy and have been removed from all the restricted lists, just TerrAscend. And so, big win for, of course, Jason Wild and TerrAscend because of this. Now, I haven't been following the new ticker very closely, but from my understanding, the Daines report provided a summary here, an additional confirmation from MSO Gang that TerrAscend stock has been removed from the restricted list where applicable from the following U.S. brokerages. And he's saying, hey, can you confirm in the comment section? Well, not all of these have changed their policies. It seems like a good amount of them never changed it in the first place, which, kudos to them. Those are the banks that you'd want to bank with, the ones that never made this ridiculous MRB policy of not allowing you to invest in plant-touching companies in the first place. But I digress. It just shows us that most of these MSOs will want to head in the direction that TerrAscend did eventually if they want more access to institutional capital. But I think the rescheduling review is going to be the biggest deal, because if 280E goes away just like that, there's going to be a ton of money flooding in regardless. At least that's my opinion. And so with that, some other stories. Marijuana Moment shares Meta will now allow limited CBD and hemp advertising on apps like Facebook and Instagram. I wonder why the change of heart. Probably because they're losing so many users. But advertisers will continue to be prohibited from running ads that promote THC products or cannabis products like medicine containing related psychoactive compounds. Too bad, but step in the right direction. So full link in the description if you wanted to grab that and go through it. While Tom Engel shares, a new Justice Department report shows that as the first state cannabis legalization laws came online, the number of people incarcerated in federal prisons for cannabis declined significantly, more so than for other drugs. And it continues to do so. So at what point is the DOJ or HHS going to do their job and act in the best interest of the American people for once? We continue to hold out for that day. And so full link in the description if you wanted to read through it, but essentially just to show you this interesting table. We look at the years 2013 to 2018. You look at cannabis and the percentage of arrests, from 12.3% down to 11.1%, down to 10.1%, down to 8.7%, down to 7.4%, down to 6.4%. Ending prohibition obviously works, and at what point are the government agencies that sadly control our fates going to acknowledge it? Hopefully sooner than later. Some more news from Boston.com. We've got another athlete of influence, former legend of the Boston Red Sox, David Ortiz, says his father's cancer diagnosis helped fuel his passion for cannabis. And so we love to see more athletes with influence talking about this and helping normalize it, as the Hall of Fame slugger is passionate about weed and he wants you to know why. And so I'm not going to go through the whole story. Of course, I'll pause or invite you to pause to read here. Scroll down a little bit more. Otherwise, grab the full link in the description. But again, we just need more athletes to come out and state the obvious, help normalize this plant so we can see some progress sooner than later. While the Charlotte Observer points out another celebrity with influence at 67, Bill Maher is reaching new comedy highs. Does he have cannabis to thank for that? Well, I'm sure he can talk your ear off and give you many reasons as to why he thinks whatever. But main thing is just more normalization of cannabis, which is ultimately better. Here you can pause to read, otherwise scroll down to this bit, grab the full link in the description. Just funny to share that my parents were so anti-cannabis growing up. Mainly my dad was a jail guard too, so anything illegal he did not want me involved in, and I started smoking cannabis at a younger age. Not saying anyone should start at a younger age, but I did, and it certainly helped me get through university, I would say, looking back. All that to say though is that my parents are now big fans of Bill Maher and Bill Burr. Fortunately, I've got a CNN dad, not a Fox News dad, but they're coming around, and fortunately thanks to some people that they watch like this talking about cannabis in a new light, It's helping them come around, and slowly but surely we're getting there. And so last few stories from Newsmax, as the Secret Service has revealed that another drug was found in the White House and cannabis was found at least 2 times last year. And so this is a follow-up story to the cocaine that was found in the White House, and the fact that they dropped the investigation saying that they couldn't determine whose it was. You'd think that there'd be cameras in the White House and that they'd be able to figure out who it belonged to. And so I don't believe that they can't figure that out. That's absolutely horseshit. But funny enough, on top of that story of coke being found in the White House, a little bit more.
Now, Congressman, after a days-long, speaking of corruption and speaking of covering up for the Bidens, after a days-long investigation, the Secret Service now says they've identified no suspects in the White House cocaine probe, if there was even one. But that's not all.
Useless.
We also learned
fucking
the
useless.
Secret Service discovered marijuana at least 2 times last year.
If only it was hunters.
They never bothered to mention it to anybody in the United States.
What the fuck?
What's going on? Is the Secret Service now among the ranks of the FBI, the DOJ, and the IRS?
Must be.
As just another government organization dedicated to covering up for the Bidens, sir?
Well, if you're a hardworking American and you see this, you begin to think that very thing, that you can't trust that the system doesn't work anymore. It's all generated around Joe Biden. The fact they found marijuana, cocaine in the White House should worry all of us. Just from a standpoint, it's a challenge to the president and his well-being. So the fact that they had this 1-week investigation and came out with nothing, I think it concerns me a lot.
It's pathetic.
But but you got Hunter Biden. We know he's on drugs. We know he's on cocaine. It probably was his, but I guess we can't prove it. And like you say, they've just swept it under the rug and we move on. But it's an important thing. Frankly, I would think the Secret Service would want to know, because it is they're there to protect the president, and having marijuana and cocaine in the White House does not
cocaine, one
bode
thing.
well for that.
If anything, weed would probably help Biden in his unfortunate mental state at the moment, but I digress. Last few stories, great listens I would recommend tuning into. This one was a Twitter Spaces held by Toby Cannabis with Sammy J, who, from my understanding, works in finance. I don't know if it's the buy side or sell side, but he works closely with CB21 and the algorithms, and he explains just a lot about what he sees based on his experience working in that industry, and how, while we complain that the markets are as they are, they would be way worse if we didn't have some of the algorithms and some of the inefficiencies bringing the price down. All that to say is what brought the price down. When the flip switches, it'll bring it all the way back up, much like we saw the price go up in 2021. Now, take that with a grain of salt, though. Of course, I recommend you listen to it, because that was just a quick summary of me trying to do my best. But some good comments down here from people that were appreciative of the conversation and the value that was presented by these two guys who've been in here for a long time, or at least following the space since 2020 when I started my YouTube channel. Well, lastly, yesterday, MJ Stock Trader held a Twitter Spaces just to talk about all the news and the political theater hiccups that bumped up from Wednesday to Friday. For cannabis stock talk, will SAFE pass in July? And while this was certainly on the topic of discussion in the first half, and there was a lot of speculation in here, main thing is that while SAFE is the topic of discussion for the moment, I think the bigger focus is the eventual catalyst that we get from the descheduling, which we all hope for, but more likely the rescheduling to Schedule 3, because descheduling would mean the government gives up complete control and we get the plant back. And you really think that they're going to give up complete control? Yeah, right. So more likely it's going to be moved to Schedule 3, but that would mean 280E removed, essentially just like that. And so again, while I'm speculating even here, I would just recommend you tune in and listen, but it does remind us that there's a lot to look forward to in the next 12 to 18 months. I'm trying to get a job again so that I can make some income and start averaging down and reinvesting. And I have my final interview with the second CEO on Monday, and so wish me luck, folks, but I hope that I can land that so I can get some money back so I can start averaging down on my these very undervalued MSOs that I do believe will be worth a lot more in the future than they are now, but that's just my opinion. And that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it, subscribe below, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.